Good morning, everyone. Got David here. I'm Tom with D20play. We're going to be talking about franchise D&D, what makes good D&D adventures, how's the Dragon Delves match up with what we think makes a good D&D adventure, some of the actual plays we've been doing, and a little update on Roll20 or D20play RPG. Lots of stuff to talk about. If you have anything to talk about, drop a message in the chat there, and we'll pretty much cover everything. So, David, you want to talk about franchise D&D.
Yes, the big news that's come recently is Dan Ayoub, I assume that's how you pronounce the name, became the VP of franchise for D&D. In his LinkedIn post, which I think Tom is showing here on the screen, he says, "We shifted our structure," this is the D&D Wizards organization, "internally and moved D&D to a full franchise model, meaning everything, books, video games, film and TV, everything touching the franchise lives under one roof." The impact here cannot be overstated. This is massive for D&D and will allow a strong, coordinated, and well-funded approach for the franchise. And most importantly for us, he includes him and us, the fans. So what does this mean? I'll circle back to that in a second. Ayoub is replacing Jess Lanzilla, who was also, this surprised me a lot, Jess was also billed as the vice president of franchise for Dungeons and Dragons. So before D&D, before Dan came on board, D&D was thinking of this franchise strategy. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. Jess was only there for about a year. She oversaw the release of the 2024 edition of D&D, but she came in too late to have much influence over what we saw in stores. She really came in too late to do much of anything. Because as we all know, coming on board a job, you spend some time getting your bearings, and then after that, she left. She could have done a smashing job in her role in that short time, but she was there, things probably didn't go so great for the D&D franchise, at least according to her bosses at Hasbro. For the game, I suspect that the 2024 reprint probably disappointed a little bit, because Hasbro tends to trumpet their wins and focus on them, and we haven't heard much about that. I suspect that D&D sales for their tabletop product have probably been leveling off or even maybe sinking a little bit. That explosive growth we've seen isn't probably there as much as it used to be. But worse for Hasbro's side of things, the D&D movie, it was creatively a hit. We all loved it, but given that it's had a huge budget, it didn't do well enough to merit a sequel, and that probably kills any chance of a D&D movie for quite some time. As far as I know, all the various D&D TV shows that were being discussed for a while have now all been shelved. The D&D Baldur's Gate video game was a smash hit and a huge driver of income for Hasbro, but the studio that made that game has decided to go in another direction and not make a sequel, so there hasn't been anything announced for D&D video games that have been excited. So the C-suite folks at Wizards and Hasbro, the top tier of management, they have to be looking at this and looking for ways to right the ship and asking whether Jess Lanzillo is the right person to fix things. Let me talk about franchise for a moment. When the folks at Hasbro think about a D&D franchise, I suspect they're looking at Marvel and their sort of franchise model, where Marvel publishes content on dead trees. I think you've heard of comic books before.
Yep.
That's only the creative engine for the real money makers of video games and movies. I know Hasbro would love to capture that sort of model where D&D's tabletop dead tree products are just the creative engine for the big money makers of video games, movies, television, subscriptions, and that sort of stuff. But so turning back to Jess came up through the creative teams at WotC. She started working on leading the narrative and art direction for Magic the Gathering. She rose through a role to setting the creative direction for the Magic the Gathering franchise. That's a quote that I got from her, some of her press releases. So that word keeps cropping up. She might be great at leading D&D's creative direction and weighing in on whether imaginary lizard people have tails. But she doesn't bring the sort of experience that can re-energize the real money makers. That's video games, movies, and TV. So I suspect Hasbro decided that someone with Jess's focus wasn't the right choice to bring the D&D business back on track. So they probably told her to go find other opportunities, and everyone would avoid having to say that she was left at anything but her own volition.
Right.
Then they decided to turn to their favorite playbook, and we've seen it time and time again. They grabbed somebody from tech, specifically from the video game world. So Jess's replacement is Dan Ayoub. He comes from video games, where he worked on the Halo video game franchise and as an executive producer for Ubisoft and a game director for Walt Disney. Video games are even bigger than movies as far as the size of the market and how much money they make. So Dan seems like a perfect fit for what Hasbro wants. He's not there to comment on lizard folks' tails. He's there to, for example, make Baldur's Gate 4 a smash. They haven't announced it, but it'll come, and get somebody excited about perhaps, for example, make a Baldur's Gate movie or TV show. So what I think this means for D&D, well, first of all, Hasbro's been focused on a franchise all along. They're just looking to switch from the creative focus of the franchise to the money-making focus of the franchise, so they can hopefully re-energize the growth from their specific perspective. And that means they've picked somebody who's less about the creative side and more about that video game side, and perhaps expanding into all those other big money outlets. And that might not be the worst thing in the world. Dan probably has less interest in meddling with the creative side of the game and more interested in matching that Marvel model. We all know, I've written posts about this, that D&D at the table thrives best when corporate pays less attention. So it could be good that the focus has changed into these other outlets, and the creative engine maybe you'll be left alone. What I think we might see, though, is a little more focus on games or products for the table that make good fits for things that can be translated into other mediums. So I predict seeing another Baldur's Gate book coming up before too long, another Baldur's Gate adventure tie-in. Maybe it'll be the next hardcover. I think we'll also see other things with maybe a narrative bent that translate to, might be switchable to TV and video games. And it could be good, it could be bad. We'll see. Meanwhile, as for Jess Lanzillo, she landed with White Wolf as creative director for World of Darkness. I'm confident that job earns a fraction of what she was making as VP of the D&D franchise, but it looks like a better fit for her creative talents, where they need somebody to guide the whole creative end of a thing that's focused a little bit more on the tabletop and hasn't been able to expand so much into the video games and movie stuff. So that's my take, Tom.
A lot of good points there. What questions do you guys have for David? Chime into the chat there. I've got tons of questions, which we don't know the answers to, I'm sure, but To put the best possible spin on how good it could go, Mike Merles had a quote, or I got a quote from Mike Merles in chat in the Ian world, where he said, as another example, the annual events like Tomb of Annihilation are 100% a byproduct of a franchise model. If you like that era, this might be a signal that they want to go back to something like that. I did like how tied together everything was as regard to the tabletop RPG, right? I liked how they had their organized play paralleling their releases with a TTRPG. Um, about Tomb of Annihilation and maybe slightly before that, it started to get to where they're kind of catering to the stars that they had, their tabletop actual play stars. I remember
Oh,
I
yes.
won't mention any names, but maybe one of the worst adventures I ever ran was written by someone who was famous, but not famous because they came up through writing, famous because they came up through the actual play area. There's been some good ones, so it's not all bad, but that was one bad byproduct of that. And then we had, after Tomb of Annihilation, let's see, what was the next season after that? Season 8 was Stream of Many Eyes, that'd be Waterdeep. And that Waterdeep, uh, the Mad Mage, Dungeons of the Mad Mage. We're going to talk about examples of good dungeons and bad dungeons. I'd like to get your take on what you think of the Dungeon and the Mad Mage versus, say, Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Two examples of dungeons. I'll leave my comments out until after you hear David's
Okay.
on those two. And then we got Baldur's Gate, right? And Baldur's Gate came out, and there was a big hubbub about how I think they tried to shoehorn some stuff to tie in to the computer game that didn't come out for years and years later. So
Yes.
that's always difficult to tie in computer games to tabletop RPGs. I love tabletop RPGs being consistent and having a lot of products that you can use and different paths you can go. Tying them into movies, tying them into video games directly can be pretty difficult. And it might be a big anchor to be carrying around for the TTRPG. And of course, the TTRPG isn't going to win a battle of budgets between it and Baldur's Gate. Someone's going to have to give there, and it's not going to be Baldur's Gate, I don't think. So,
Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus is a grade A example of how the franchise model executed badly
yeah,
and make a mess of
yeah.
a product.
Now, some good points. Everyone likes to always give their credentials. Dan does his here. He got the basic set. He never stopped playing. He's playing with the same group he played with since he was 12 years old. And Jess has the same type of credentials. Even the CEO has credentials that he puts up, although they seem maybe too good to believe with how many people he plays D&D with. So they like their credentials out there. And then in his LinkedIn post here, he talks about books first. I assume that means tabletop RPG books, but there's lots of other books that come out. Video games, film, TV. And so it'll be real interesting to see how heavy his time is weighted on those four things. And does he have direct people under him? Like, who's the direct person under him that covers TTRPGs? Who reports to him is in charge of that? I'd like to know who that person is. Film, TV, Joe Manganiello was working on a TV adaptation for Dragonlance. And if you think about Dragonlance, you think about oh, what is Westeros, Winds of Winter, George
Game
R.
of
R. Martin.
Thrones, George R.
Yeah,
R.
Game of
Martin.
Thrones. Dragons can and should be just horrific, just absolutely horrific. So you could make a really adult type of D&D TV series if you wanted to. And I think that's the way Joe might have been going. That'd be pretty interesting. You
Oh,
think
yeah.
about the logistics of the Dragonlance armies maintaining multiple dragons in their armies, and how do they feed those dragons? What are they? What other armies are getting fed to the dragons? Type of thing. Dark stuff, and I think really, really good TV, really powerful TV. So we'll see if any of that comes back, right? And film, they handed their film stuff over to other people after the unfortunate D&D movie, which I loved. I thought it was a great movie. Thought it was really well done. It had amazing stars in it. Um, it had um, who played the halfling just a cameo type appearance. Oh, shoot, trying to blank on his name. Let me know in the chat if you remember his name. Anyway, had some great stars in that movie. So it was unfortunately timed with some faux pas from the business side where they, right before that movie came out, the OGL debacle happened.
Yep.
How much was that movie boycotted because of that? I don't know, but it certainly didn't help it. It could only hurt it, not help it. So that was unfortunate timing. And like you said, we don't know exactly how good things are doing money wise. It's so hard to track the Bradley Cooper. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Chris. Chris chimed in. I couldn't believe that was Bradley Cooper. I'm watching the movie and I'm like, is that Bradley Cooper playing a halfling in the D&D movie? It's like, what? So there's a lot of upside potential. There's a lot of downside potential. And really, it feels like, when you're talking about a corporation trying to make money, the TTRPG is the bottom of the barrel as far as doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's just the way the accounts shape out.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Another question. Okay. So let's look at this Wargamer article. I got this pulled up here. Let me share this. Pardon me for all the ads you'll see here. But they had the LinkedIn, which we were showing, same stuff, shifting their internal structure to the full franchise movie. They give a little bit of background about Ayub, who worked at D&D since 2022. And he was head of studios and then senior VP of digital games. And then now I assume senior VP of D&D. And he worked at Microsoft before that for 11 years, predominantly on Halo. And yeah, all the rest is basically from the article. So it'd be great to get Dan to come on and talk about what's the future path for D&D. Yeah, that cameo had us dying so random from Runeforge Tabletop Gaming. Runeforge Tabletop Gaming's got a cool Shadow Dark Camelot game. Check that out. It's pretty neat. So let's look at what their future plans are, the release schedule, and then we'll just kind of circle back to franchise and talk about how that could play. Here we go. Okay. So 2025, and we can compare and contrast what Draw Steel's doing, what Daggerheart's doing to these release schedules. You get the Monster Manual come out this year, completing the 2024 set of core books, which, we had a guest on that was talking about when 3.5 came out, and the very best that Wizards of the Coast could hope for with 3.5 was to break even, and they just barely did. Like the sales didn't go down when 3.5 came out. They stayed constant. And I think 2024 probably went down. They definitely didn't, I don't think, go up. And that's to be expected. And it's like, why did they not know that? There's a whole thing about why did they do the 2024 release that we can get into a little bit. So the consensus and thought is that D&D Beyond was making a ton of money on D&D Beyond, and they could do that forever as long as the rules were the same. As soon as the rules changed, they'd have to do a different agreement. Well, Wizards said, we're going to change the rules. You want to sell it to us? And they're like, they didn't want to sell it to them until they realized, oh, we're changing the rules. So was Wizards changing the rules just to get the purchase of D&D Beyond, which is what they did. And they bought D&D Beyond, and now they're stuck making this rule change for kind of no good reason, right? It's not going to make them more money. It's going to, at best, keep them level on sales. They had a real opportunity. It's the 50th edition or 50th anniversary of D&D. The only way to make good money is to redo the rules and change them pretty significantly. I would have loved to have seen a lot more tightening of the rules, kind of going back to some of the early 5th edition D&D Next ideas where they didn't have bonus actions. The game was a little bit tighter. But to make a game make money and sell to players, you got to give players options. And so it's going to always keep expanding. And if you don't do a hard reset, then you got 10 years of expansion that now you're going to have 10 more years of expansion on. And the broken combinations that can result are crazy. Anyway, back to their releases. So Dragon Delves, we'll talk about a little bit about Dragon Delves. This looks like maybe a good course correction to a little bit better type of adventures. We'll see. Eberron Forge of the Artificer. Let's look at that in a little detail. This is coming out next. And this is just a 112-page expansion. It's got player options. You know, what's going to sell your books? Player options. A revised Artificer class, 5 subclasses, 5 species, including Living Construct Warforged, 17 backgrounds. That's interesting because backgrounds really tie down characters currently in 5th edition. I bet this has a lot to do with families and dragon marks and such. 28 feats, exploring the mystery of dragon marks. A new spell, new bastion options, magic inventions. And then for the DM, we got some outlines for you. There's 3 of them. So not a lot for the DM. And you know, so that's a strategy. Let's see how that sells for them, how that does.
I think there's 2 things at play here. One is they're experimenting with the different formats with that 128-page thing.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that indicates that, well, you know, they've been experimenting with formats for the last few years with those slipcase books and whatnot. But I think they're also acknowledging that there was a well-regarded Eberron book that already came out, and they don't want to just redo the lore in that book. So it's more of a rules update for Eberron.
Yeah, so let's go back to the release schedule. That's Eberron Forge of War coming out next month, middle of next month. Heroes of the Borderlands set. We did a video. You can go check our videos for that. We looked at kind of the presentation of it, the layout of it. We don't have any more info yet, but since it's next in the block and they've kind of given us a lot more data on Forge Artificer, we should start seeing more Heroes of the Borderlands popping out. I ran the original Borderlands adventure, of course, 40 years ago. I ran it as a kid, and I just ran it using the d20play RPG, which is very OSR-ish, very Shadow Dark-ish, very first edition D&D-ish, so it kind of had that feel of running that adventure. I'll talk about that adventure when we're talking about what makes a good adventure, because I guess some thoughts on that after having run it. That's coming out. Forgotten Realms Player's Guide, Adventurer's Guide. I don't know what the Lorwyn crossover book might be.
Lorwyn is a Magic the Gathering setting.
Oh, okay.
So I guess the Magic the Gathering books have done well enough that they're ready to put out another crossover book.
Yeah. So the adventure, you have a Player's Guide and Adventure Guide. So it'll be interesting to see what's in that Adventure Guide. Is it full-on adventures? Is it outlines again? What's that going to be? So what are your thoughts on release schedule and franchise, how that plays together?
Well, I don't think we've seen the full impact of the franchise thinking yet. I'm hoping to see a little bit more of that synergy between everything getting the same focus at one time that we saw in the Tomb of Annihilation days, because I felt like you really got a good sense of community when everyone was turning their attention to the same setting, the same adventure, the same branching paths from it.
It really felt like that, and probably it's hard to quantify how much that contributes to sales. But organized play has been kind of abandoned by Wizards of the Coast as being their flagship for paralleling their books. They've handed it over to others who are working, you know, like we have Legends of Greyhawk coming, which I love, but there's no Greyhawk products for sale, you know, so Wizards isn't trying to get that to parallel what they're doing. They kind of just gave up on that model of an organized play paralleling their books. And I wonder if that's contributing to their books kind of lagging and faltering and not getting a whole lot of attention. So that's an interesting take on that. We talked about Jess moving. A lot of people have been moving. Got Jess moving, Chris moving, Jeremy moving, who did the videos for them all.
Todd
Kenrick, their video producer. And then Jess, everyone's moving. Everyone's gone. That's not a good sign for how well it did, obviously. Nor what does the future look like? if Chris and Jeremy are like, oh, we're going to do some great stuff in the next 5 years, can't wait to do it. Well, they're
Well,
not
we've
there.
got
So,
Greg Bilsland as the new Chris and Wes Schneider as the new Jeremy.
okay.
Both of them have been long time people in and out of the D&D creative circle. So, I mean,
Yeah, I'd love to get Greg or Wes on the stream sometime. Greg said he might be able to drop on sometime,
ooh,
so hopefully we'll get that. I'd love to hear what Greg's ideas are for stories, future stories. We're gonna get anything like a Tomb of Annihilation again in the future. Okay, want to transition into what makes a good adventure? Yeah,
well, one other thing to mention about the
yeah,
future releases is that there seems like there's a bigger emphasis on getting third-party stuff on D&D Beyond, and that
yeah,
could point to at least an experiment with a change of strategy where the D&D team is not putting out as much content and they're focusing more on making the money for free. We know it's not really free to put something on D&D Beyond, but make money with less creative input or resources needed by just having other people put their stuff on D&D Beyond and then taking a cut.
yeah. I'm showing, I think, the screen right now. Yeah, showing the screen for D&D Beyond, and if you look at sources, you can see Avantris Entertainment, you see Mage Hand Press, you see Roll and Play Press. Um, there's been some big names on there too. Um, not that those aren't. And I don't know if anyone's checked out the Avantris actual plays that are on the D&D YouTube now. Very interesting format how they're doing it. You should go check those out. You know, I'm not a big fan of watching actual plays necessarily, but they have some interesting stuff going on with their actual plays where they
Yeah,
have a lot
tell
of
me, Tom.
focus. What was that?
Oh, go ahead. You were about to roll into what those
Yeah,
innovations are.
focus on the people playing. So you guys see the other people playing, and then it transitions to the map. It's got the map showing most of the time for the tactical aspects, and then it'll transition to the D&D Beyond character sheet. You'll zoom in on the rules they're looking up and rules they're using. So it gives a real feel, I think, for maybe a new player about what am I looking at while I'm playing the game, and what's a game like this really feel like. It seems to come across a lot more like a player might experience. So that's pretty interesting. All right. So our new Dragon Delves anthology. We have this Dragon Delves. Here we go. So this anthology's got 10 adventures for up to 12th level characters. So you can do, and it's also got a little bit of a creating a campaign tie-in where you can run this as one long campaign where the party experiences all 10 adventures, or you can drop any adventure into any campaign. And the adventures are maybe pretty short, maybe 1 or 2 sessions. Let's see, let's just look and see if they talk about how many sessions at the top of this adventure. This adventure is designed to fill 1 or 2 sessions of play anywhere where there's small islands. They have key plot points, they have preparation, they have bookmarks to make, they have key NPCs. So nice organization for each of these adventures. Nice organization for the book overall. Um, one drawback of these massive campaign books is, do I want to really spend 2 years or a year plus running this campaign? And if there's nice stuff in it, you always want to pull it out and use it. And now they give you all the tools to really do that. What are your initial thoughts on Dragon Delves, David?
Well, this represents a back to basics approach.
Hmm.
It's a compendium of shorter adventures, which all feature dragons and dungeons. Dungeon adventures are probably the easiest to craft as an adventure format to share with somebody, because unlike with a big hardcover, you don't have to pay attention to figuring out how to get the players from one chapter to the next.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit of an easier back to basics format, and it works pretty well from what I've seen. I kind of started at the back end of the adventures, looking at some of the later ones because I figured I'd be playing some of the ones in the beginning of the book, and um, I've liked what I've seen. I would run these adventures and be happy about it.
Yeah. So some things that make a good adventure. We got some comments from people on our Discord, some comments from X. Let me just share some of these. Um, Memes Lich said, it needs to explain in an easy to understand way what to say and run for the players. It's that simple. Why can't all these modules be written in plain, direct instructional language that has a clear A to B to C? That's a excellent, excellent point. There's huge variation, right, in that and how adventures write that. I think Source of Victory adventures are really well written that way. I think Kelsey Dion adventures are really well written that way. Just right direct to what you need as a DM to run the adventure. Not a lot of exposition, not a lot of filling in the blanks. Kind of leaves that to the DM to fill in the blanks. And when you're DMing for a group of players, often the players fill in the blanks for you, and you can just run with what they come up with. That's the reason why things are the way they are. Um, Adventures that aren't great at that. Uh, Gosh, if you look at the late first edition and a lot of second edition adventures, just walls of text,
Yeah.
so much text, so much read aloud text. Um, as a DM, you can't run that on the fly and catch the important thing that's on the last sentence of paragraph 5. That was important. And I'm running the Giant Adventures right now. The first one's published by TSR by Gary Gygax, and they're super short. You have G1 against the Steady and the Hill Giant Chief, 8 pages long. And unfortunately, it's written stream of thought.
Yeah.
So some important things you might find in the room might be listed at the end of the room. Not the very first thing the DM should see and describe to the characters. And some things you might trip up and say something that cues the players in, what appears to be a torch. Cue the players in right to what is not really a torch, but something else written into the adventure. So you have that. And then it got very long-winded as the years went on. And then it's kind of circling back. OSE is another format I like, where they have the adventure maps, and right on the maps, they put a lot of the detail. That's
Yeah,
how I
that's
used to,
wonderful.
yeah, that's how I used to, when I was doing all my own adventures and writing all my own adventures and playing every week with a group, is I'd draw the map out and write notes all over the map. There's nothing else written down anywhere else. And that really makes it easy to run, actually. What are your
One of
thoughts, David?
one of the standards that I have, and maybe this is just me, but when I read an adventure, one of the standards that I think of to see whether this is useful for me is how much of this stuff in the adventure could I improvise straight away at the table? Um, I only played the Spelljammer adventure. I didn't read it, so I don't have the final authority on this. But my feeling is that the adventure came. They started with a setting with a lot of lore and monsters and whatnot, and then they kind of ran through an adventure that I could have improvised with if I had the maps, because it was sort of a tour through the monster book with us fighting this monster and that monster. Um, that to me is a low value adventure, and I probably just as soon improvise my own stuff. But when it's got a lot of things in there that I can't easily come up with at the table, vivid characters, maybe especially dungeon rooms that have interesting things to figure out, connections between different things that you probably couldn't just make up on the spot, treasure maps, all that good stuff. That to me is a win. And that's why things like Tomb of Annihilation, for example, was a big hit with me, because there's no way I could have made up all that stuff that appeared in the adventure. There was a creative well that I can draw on to play, and it delivered extra value at the table.
Yeah.
So that's something I like to see.
So to Wizards' credit, the adventures are definitely better than they used to be by a lot. They're a lot more succinct. They're a lot more bulletized. The information's there quick for the DM to get to. But then you hit on a point. So some of the later hardcovers that Wizards of the Coast was doing. Spelljammer kind of was the pinnacle for me of like what's going on here. What I like to have in an adventure is something that's a location that's alive, that can be explored, that the party can take multiple tacks on, multiple paths to conquer, and it reacts to them. And maybe the pinnacle of that is, of course, Castle Ravenloft. You have a setting to explore, and that's why I love the giant adventures: the Steading of the Hill Giant Chief, the Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl, the Hall of the Fire Giant King. These are big locations that are going to take you 2, 3, 4 sessions to finish exploring in total. And you won't explore all of them because it's multiple paths. It's not like you're going from encounter 1 to encounter 2 to encounter 3 to encounter 4. But that's what Spelljammer became. It was sometimes one encounter in a planet. So you go to planet 1, here's your one encounter. You go to planet 2, here's your one encounter. It's like there's no exploration at all happening. You're just leading us to encounter to encounter to encounter. It feels like no agency at all in the hands of the players. And so that's why I really like those older school adventures. Now, how big do I like them to be? Sometimes they can get to be too big, right? Because you get a theme going, you're really enjoying the theme, but it can grind after 3 or 4 sessions. You can start to say, okay, I've had enough Jungle Temple for a little while,
Absolutely.
right? And so I think my sweet spot is probably a 2 to 3, maybe 4 session location where the party can really feel the theme of it and experience the location and the NPCs they're trying to overcome, or other challenges they're trying to overcome, and then move on to something else cool. And I think Matt Mercer has a really good video about how modules were that way, right? It had a theme, you got to play for several sessions, and then you did something different.
Yeah.
And you felt like you won, you felt like you achieved something, you overcame something, and then on to something different. So that's my sweet spot, I'd say, for size. Got a input from the Discord from Cade. He says, what do I look for? Theme, does it pique my interest? Is it a tone I care about? Yep. Clarity, is it straightforward? Logic, does it track? Allow for player agency, big one. And then art and maps are always helping to sell the theme, of course, right? Maps being a big one. You want the maps to be a location the party's exploring that they can take on many different ways in my perfect adventure.
Right. Some of the other recent adventures have had some, I would consider sort of beginner faults
Mm-hmm.
in the adventure. For example, Mike Shea Sly Flourish keeps talking about recent adventures that have a patron NPC who, has some evil goal
Mm-hmm.
and betrays the party. That's always a bad dynamic at the table because it either makes the players feel bad about being tricked, or it makes the adventure fragile because the players are clever enough to figure it out in the first scene, or it 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 I lost my number 3, but
Yeah.
um,
So I'm running one now that's a huge aspect of, and right away I'm like, no, that's dumb. These are these are these characters have a wish spell. I mean, they aren't going to be tricked, and it has a mechanism to trick them in the adventure. That's just like, well, nothing you can do. Sorry, he tricks you. But it felt so much better to be like, okay, he's going to appear pretty early on and confront them when he's way too powerful for them, and then they're going to really hate him. They're going to really want to take their revenge on him. And oh, by the way, he's kind of aligned with them on what he wants to achieve. So now there's that aspect and that dynamicism. Um, And so now it's players up to the players. When are they going to go back and confront them? They're going to do it right away. Are they going to wait till they have acquired enough power and magic to really defeat them easily? Are they not going to defeat them and just align themselves with them and achieve their main goal, and then probably have to fight them after the main goal? It just puts all that in the hands of the players, as opposed to you don't know what's going on, and hey, I tricked you at the end.
yeah.
Yeah,
Number 3, you don't
yeah,
want to set up that dynamic where the players start mistrusting everyone that you're sending in there to deliver a hook for
yeah,
them.
yeah.
It just it just makes your work as a DM so much harder
Yeah.
when you try and set up hooks and they don't believe anything that's put before them. But switching over to the other basic mistake that I feel like I've seen recently is dungeon spaces that are too small for
Yes.
the group. You've got six characters, probably 5 or 6 on average, some big
Mhm.
monsters, and they're in a 20 by 20 room.
Yeah.
That fight is not gonna play fun unless maybe you're theater of the mind. I guess that there's a lot of folks who are writing D&D adventures for wizards now that are all theater of the mind and really not thinking these things through.
So let's talk about Keep on the Borderlands. Keep on the Borderlands, we just played recently. How many sessions did that one take us to finish? I think it was 4 sessions, and I play pretty fast. So that might be a lot more sessions for some other groups. I cut the monsters in the dungeon in half because those old school adventures, they talk about how many characters are going into the adventure, and it's usually like they say like 6 to 9
Yeah,
characters coming into the adventure, and usually I play with 5. Um, so I cut the monsters in half, and it was still jam packed. I can't imagine doubling how many things are in that dungeon. When you don't play Theater of the Mind and you actually have a real map and you actually have real opponents you're facing, some things become very clear that, oh, that really wouldn't work. That's way too packed together.
yeah,
Um, but so that adventure maybe had a little too much for my taste, a little too much of the theme, a little too long, too many things to fight. Had some very cool things about it though. At the party got to at the end, and of course the party's got all their agency. You could just take out a couple big groups of monsters, like maybe all the hobgoblins, or maybe all the orcs, or maybe all the gnolls, and still have a really fun adventure.
yeah.
So that one went a little too far in length for me.
Those
Kels,
early adventures were not only written for bigger parties, but they were written for a faster pace of play than you can
true,
really get
right?
with fifth
Yeah,
edition. So you could run through a lot of material in your 4-hour session, more than you can if you're using weapon mastery and
that's a huge point. So
whatnot.
I was running that with the D20play RPG, which is action move economy. One action per character per round, and so it goes really fast, just like first edition D&D did. I think it's a little faster because it's using more like the fifth edition initiative, which I think is faster than having everyone declare their actions and then you figure them out. Although you can speed that up pretty quick and make first edition go pretty fast. But anyway, we were playing fast, and it took 4 sessions. We were playing
Mm,
fast with a
that's a
simple
lot.
session with a simple system. So when Heroes of the Borderlands comes out, I want to run that with fifth edition, see how many sessions it takes. It's interesting how they're dividing it up, it looks like, where they're dividing up where each monster's cave system, like the group of orcs, well, there aren't orcs because you can't kill orcs now. Goblins, the group of goblins because they're fey, it's okay to slaughter fey. Um, gnolls because they're demons. And anyway, they have their own little dungeon. We'll see how that's set up, see how that works. And I was joking with those things, but what an insult to our intelligence fifth edition did with the monster changes. It's like we're going in and we're killing things. There's going to be some real moral ambiguity to that. You don't need to try and make it okay to kill things. It never is. It's never okay to kill Fae, or maybe it's okay to kill demons. But
Well, I think the emphasis is on roles. So
yeah,
you're okay talking about killing bandits or
right.
work bandits.
Or goblins because they're all Fae.
Well,
Yeah.
huh,
And they're not humanoids
I'm
now.
not sure about that, but I think they did want to make a little bit more of a clear
Yeah.
division between human-like
Yeah.
things and inhumans.
So anyway, it's like um, those old adventures, that's a little bit too big for me. You know who hits the nail on the head though is I think Kelsey did it really well with her first 2 intro adventures. The Scarlet Minotaur, was it Labyrinth Catacombs of the Scarlet Minotaur? I think it is. Um, that's like a 2 session adventure to explore almost all of it, and it also has a mechanism where you can accelerate it because there's a foe that you can kind of bring in and force the end of it. Um, the Hideous Halls of Muggle Blood, another 2 session adventure. So they're just the right size of a location to explore over like 2 sessions. Lost Citadel, the Scarlet Minotaur, yeah, solid adventure. Absolutely. That is, ironically, the highest viewed video on my channel.
Oh,
Us,
no kidding.
our actual play of Lost Citadel, the Scarlet Minotaur. I have like 700 videos almost now of actual plays and tips and stuff. That one's the highest one. So it just shows you how, I think, popular Kelsey's system is, obviously, but also how I've had so many comments from people saying that's the only actual play I've watched from start to finish because it's just so much more faster pace and exploration focused instead of being focused on what's um what's on my character sheet, right? You're more outward focused as a player into the world. Thanks a lot, Runeforged. I don't think it's ironic. That's a great video, well timed. Thanks. Um, Chris says it is what brought me to your channel. Thanks, Chris. I've had a couple people even say it's what motivated them to start writing for Shadow Dark. So that's a huge
Wow.
praise. Thank you so much for that. Anyone who did that. So I think those are about the perfect size. You played in both of those, David. What do you think of those adventures as a player?
Oh, I loved them both.
Hmm.
It really recaptured a style of play that I haven't experienced in quite a while because
Yeah,
it is fast paced and there is that constant, intense um, concern that you could die, and you're engaging with the location
right.
instead of engaging with your character sheets.
Yeah,
So all pluses. I'm curious as how Shadow Dark would play with a more narrative arc where it's not just a complete sandbox and you need
yeah,
to um,
yeah. I have a theory on that. I don't know if I'm right, but it really feels like the more mechanics you add to make it more narrative, the less narrative it's going to be. Feels like you want to get the mechanics out of the way to be more narrative. Um, Daggerheart went real heavy mechanics, and they want to be narrative first, and their mechanics kind of force things to happen. Um, but sometimes they force things not to happen too, because you'll roll with fear and you won't get to do what you thought you were going to do. Now the DM's going. Um, so it's a real interesting dichotomy and discussion. It's like, do you want a lot of mechanics to be narrative first or not? I like narrative, not necessarily first, but narrative resulting from the gameplay,
oh
narrative
yeah, for
resulting
sure.
from the actions of the characters, right? You don't know what's going to happen, but it's real interesting story of what does happen is what I like to see at the table. Runeforged says we just got done running a more narrative Shadow Dark campaign. The biggest issue is that with Shadow Dark's lethality, it makes narrative games harder. We end up adding house rules for more heroic characters. Yeah, it does. And that's an interesting thing about Daggerheart, not to turn this into a full Daggerheart video, but the death in that game is like real fast and can happen to you quickly. When you get near, when you have 1 hit point left or 2 hit points left, 1 hit kills you. And then you have 3 options. One is you go out in a blaze of glory and you're dead. Another one is you risk it all and there's maybe a 45 to 50% chance you live and heal up a little bit, but there's a 45% chance you die. And then the third one is you're unconscious, you're safe, but there's a chance you're losing hope, which is like your character's getting weaker. And so none of them are 100% guaranteed good.
Yeah.
Some can be, they all three can have permanent consequences, and 2 of them have permanent death consequences. So I was really surprised by that quote narrative first game. Death is pretty final. So I hope your narrative had you planned on dying. Because
Yeah. Well, it's
yeah,
sometimes forgotten, but
yeah, it
a
makes
lot of
good story.
stories come from
Yeah,
setbacks
yeah,
and death.
yeah.
We were
But
talking about,
that's a result of what happens, not I'm going to plan to die. I guess you could do that if you want to be
well, I've
first. Yeah.
I've seen players who relish the chance to
Yes.
lean into a heroic death for their
Yeah.
character,
Yeah.
or players who are just tired of a particular character and ready for something new and act with suicidal
Leroy Jenkins.
recklessness. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. A comment here on what makes a good adventure in the chat. What makes a good adventure? Let us know. Amit, he just wanted to say, how does Dragon Delves compare to pre-2024 adventures, and is this direction seems to fix any issues with 5e overall? So yeah, I mean, I like the combination of having kind of how they did it, where you can do a full-on campaign of it. I'll admit it's a pretty thin thread through the full-on campaign, definitely, versus take them out individually and use them individually. Um, some of the other adventures would, I think, benefit from that. Could be done that way. Wild Beyond the Witchlight, it had a path you took through it, but it could have easily been player choice in the path if it had been written a little bit differently. And there's some good resources online to do that with that adventure, and you can kind of do that with a lot of different adventures. But when it's written where it's so hardcore story of the adventure, then it's hard to separate them, and the players feel like they have less and less agency. So I like this type of way of doing it better. Let's talk about Dungeon of the Mad Mage. So that's an example of way too much of the same theme for me.
Well, they did do one thing, and each one
Yeah,
of the levels has a sort of distinctive theme
yeah.
that has its own different flavor. Each level feels like a different dungeon. So that's
Hmm.
good.
Yeah. Yeah, you could drop them in, and we played it a little bit that way too. Like we were playing um, in a get together, I think at Kirk's house with all of us. We played one level of it,
Right.
the high level part
You
of
were
it.
in one of those
Yeah,
top levels, and it worked fine
yeah,
as just a drop-in thing. In fact, that's probably what it's better suited to as maybe a campaign interlude where the characters drop into a level.
yeah,
I ran it at the game store, and the players started getting a little exhausted by this returning to the dungeon, even with the variety of flavors. And they also really missed having an overarching goal. You know,
yeah,
you can curse about the newfangled players who aren't just in for killing the monsters and taking their stuff, but my players at the game store were just not interested in that sort of goal, and they wanted something more heroic to aim for, which after a while you kind of killed the campaign, and we switched to
yeah.
something else.
So I'm running the Giant Adventures, and of course, the very first adventure is written by Gygax for TSR, and they are super focused on the goal, right? I I mean, to succeed in those adventures, you don't want to go into the dungeon, fight everything in the dungeon, take all its treasure, because you won't survive that. The giants way outpower you. And we ran the first G1, and the party, snuck around most of the time and got to the main lair, and they had plenty of good fights, but they didn't go fight every giant. Um, I played G2 just recently, and the party faltered the first couple of times because they never once questioned a giant, never once tried to pretend they were there as, you know, emissaries of someone else. It was just straight up fight every fight. And that won't work. You can't do that in the giant adventures. And so that's why the one thing I love about them is that there's a reason to be there besides just kill everything and take its treasure. And in the third session, they played really brilliantly. They avoided some very dangerous areas. They convinced some not too smart ogres that they were there to talk to the Jarl. They had to fight a few things to get to the Jarl, but a lot less than if they had just gone in to fight everything. Um, so I like those adventures for having a goal. I think that's a huge and important thing. And Strahd's the same way. Castle Ravenloft, you normally have a goal when you're playing that one. That one's on the verge of being too big an adventure, but it's so atmospheric and thematic. It's pretty fun anyway. There's these ones where you can play Strahd in one night, where it's a 4-hour session and then you fight Strahd. I tried that, and it's just too little time to really do any exploring of the castle. 4 hours is not enough time. So I expand that to 8 hours, and that's borderline because there's so much cool stuff in that castle. So that castle, you probably need 4 sessions to completely explore it and to have time. Um, but it's interesting. It's very much replayable when you give yourself a time limit, and then you haven't explored it all, so you can go back and play it again with a different goal and explore different parts of it.
It's the gold standard for my model of could I improvise this? Because every room is so rich with
Yeah.
flavor and tricks and things to figure out. It's just chef's kiss.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Perfectly done. Okay, so I can't leave without shouting out Heroic Maps. Let me share this tab instead. So Heroic Maps did a full set of maps for Dragon Delves. If you look at the most popular GM's Guild titles, they're here: Forbidden Vale, Dragon's Sandstone City, Before the Storm, Copperford. They got all the maps up there, and they have a bundle. And I don't know if it's still running for sure or not, but it was all the maps for the whole book for $10. Just absolutely worth it. Just to get an idea of how gorgeous their maps are. Let's look at the Will of Orcus here. Just really beautiful maps for the adventure, and they do it in a way that you can bring them into Roll20, and they'll be lined up with the Roll20's already set up dynamic lighting.
Mhm.
So that's a nice time saver, and you can bring them into D&D maps, right? D&D maps can import flat maps. I haven't tried D&D maps out. I'd be real interested to see what everyone thinks in the chat about how good D&D maps is. Runeforge says there's a Shadow Dark adjacent adventure called The Count, the Castle, and the Curse. Non-infringing Castle Ravenloft. Oh, yep. And that was by our friend. Oh gosh, drawing a blank on the name. Didn't realize I had dynamic lighting already on it. Let me just do a quick look on my Discord here. And Shadow Dark. So we talk about all things Shadow Dark, Dragon, Daggerheart, Draw Steel, etc. Kelsey shouted out the creator of that adventure just recently. Why do I not have it? I thought I put it in Shadow Dark. There it is. Yeah, Chris Powell. That's it. Chris Powell, I think, did that adventure. And he's played with us in some Shadow Dark games as well. So very cool. All right.
Coming
Anything
up,
else?
you're running some Dragon Delves, and I'll be
Yeah.
playing in some of them.
Oh yeah.
So
So
looking forward to that.
let's look at some actual plays that we just did. You weren't able to make this one, but this was the actual play of chapter 7 of Vecna. So I'm running Vecna. Of course, it's kind of deviated a little bit, and we're at level 17 now. So the characters are crazy high level. They just fought a Kraken who ate one of the characters, and that character was lost forever. But they did a true resurrection to bring him back. Being 17th, 18th, 19th level now, they have access to that. But great little adventure. And then the next 3 sessions or next 3 adventures for that are going to really deviate because I want to really hit some of the high end opponents the party could go after, being on their way to Vecna and Cass and other high level guys. And I'm not going to pull any punches, so if they all die, they all die. But it'll be a fun end to
At
that.
at this point, my sense is that in the written adventure, the adversaries are simply roadblocks. No, too strong a word. Speed bumps to let the players demo their cool abilities, and
Yeah,
you've definitely dialed up the difficulty to make it more reasonable foes for characters of our tier. I don't think there's anybody at Wizards who has a great sense of how much characters, even over just 5th level, can beat.
yeah. I can't think of recently an adventure that was challenging. They're really almost always cakewalks. I can see why you'd want to write them on the slightly easy end, right? You don't want
Yeah,
everyone who plays them to die. Um, but player capabilities and party compositions and build access, um, books and such, parties can vary tremendously. So you always have to have a scale you can graduate as far as how challenging stuff is. And don't fault them for writing them slightly on the easy side. But yeah, I ramp them way up for sure to make it fun and challenging for our group. So we did that one. Then we did the actual play of Against the Giants, G2. Great maps by John Pintar. Um, um, blowing a horn of Valhalla right before the big battle with the Jarl was quite an epic battle. Lightning bolts were flying, flame strikes were flying, necklace of fireballs was being hurled. Things got pretty epic at the end. It was a lot of fun and a lot of good play getting to the end. So that was a lot of fun too. And yeah, Tuesday, and there's still, gosh, I think there's still two spots left. If you're interested in playing the D20 Play RPG, Dragon Delves, we're doing that Tuesday. Just drop me an email or a DM. See, I've been working a lot on the D20 RPG on the dragons. So here's the spreadsheet I have setting up dragons for the game. And of course, you kind of got to shrink the levels a little bit, right? Because characters go up to 12th level, 10th level, maximum, not 20th level maximum. So you want the venerable great worm type things to be low 20s maybe. And that's what I did it. And so I have the fledgling dragons being level 3 and up, mature 6 and up, and that lines up exactly with first edition D&D, where white dragons were 6 on average, gold dragons were 11 on average hit dice. And then the next age category up is matching Shadow Dark's dragons, where they're not the same exact name, but similar dragons are 14, 12, up to 17 max. And I got up to 17 max in that age category. And then the venerable age category being the things you'd fight at very high level. So been working on that and doing stuff in a spreadsheet. Mike Merle suggested this, right? For game design, you better do everything in a spreadsheet to make sure it all lines up right and things are growing at strength like they should be growing. And so I have all the monsters that I'm working on in a spreadsheet. I need to do the same thing with all the spells I'm working on. The players just got to 9th level in the giant adventure, so that'll be 5th level spells I need to get in there and add into that. There's an alpha test going on for that, so if you want to be part of that, run that for your group, just let me know. Drop me an email or a DM and I can add you to that so you can see those rules. Very OSR-ish, very inspired by Shadow Dark, OSR, OSE, first edition D&D, and the best parts that I liked from 4th edition, the best parts I liked from 5th edition. I like a very fast game, so the game kind of gets out of your way, but there's a lot of tactics, so you can really be engaged in the whole game the whole time, even though you're only taking one action. And since it's so fast, your turn's going to come up right away again, so you always have to be watching and paying attention. That's all I got. Anything else for you, David?
That's all I got.
All right. Based 4E enjoyer. Yeah, 4E was I really liked a lot of the rules about it. I didn't like constantly graduating DCs. Like, hey, I'm climbing a ladder, it's a DC 10. Hey, this ladder's on fire, it's DC 15. Hey, this ladder's on fire, it's got demonic slime on it, it's a DC 25. It's just like, it's okay to get good at things. You don't have to always go up like that. But I loved a lot of 4th edition stuff. It got to where the monsters didn't deal out enough damage. Players were super resilient, but then any game gets that way as it gets on in age. And it was a simple thing, and I didn't do this yet at that time as a DM, of ramping up the damage. And that's how I would do it in 5th edition. To make it challenging for the players, ramp up the damage by large quantities. Don't ramp up the hit points, because then it gets a slog. If the monsters just never go down, that's not as fun for the players. So I like to make it really scary because they've taken a lot of damage fast, but they can take the monsters out fast too. All right. That's it. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you again soon.